Been a while since I've done one of these videos, and with the state that Throne and Liberty appears to be in, I'm gonna have a lot of extra time on my hands, so I decided to make this video. I could only get this list down to a top 5, because after the top 5 it becomes a pretty major struggle to start to rank these. Do note that these are the top 5 upcoming MMOs that I personally am the most interested in. They probably will not align with your list because everybody has different preferences. And I like things like open world PvP and MMOs, and a lot of people don't, so my list will not be necessarily a mainstream list. However, I am going to do another video on the upcoming MMOs I think have the best chance to be more mainstream and mass appeal sometime after I get this one done. I'm not sure when. So before we get to the top 5, there's a bunch of MMOs I want to go through that did not make my top 5, and I'm going to explain why. This first group of upcoming MMOs just have a lot to prove before they could even get close to my top 5. I'll start with the obvious one, Throne and Liberty. This is a game that I have covered a lot on this channel, but I will say that I've always viewed TL as a 2 to 3 month game, and never one that would have made it very high on this list anyways. And I sat on the idea of making the first Everything Known About TL video for a long time, because it's developed by NCSoft and they were being very closed with the development of the game. Ultimately, I did decide to cover that game, and in hindsight, I certainly wish I wouldn't have, but it is a lesson learned. Obviously, major improvements would have to be made to that game to see it move up my list at all. And it has gone for me from a 2 to 3 month game to a game that I'll probably still play, but I am not sure I will get 2 to 3 months out of it at all like I had hoped. Camelot Unchained is another disappointing MMO to add to the list. If you thought TL was in development hell, check out the development hell that Camelot Unchained is in. And with all this time, they still have very little to show for it. Deciding to build an engine from scratch with a small indie startup studio was one of the many mistakes this project made over the years. It is sad because Dark Age of Camelot and Warhammer Online both had great PvP systems, and of course Mark Jacobs was behind both of those projects as well. This looked to be a spiritual successor to Dark Age, but it does seem highly unlikely we will ever see it. In fact, I'm kind of amazed it is still even being developed, although they somehow managed to secure some more funding recently. Then you have Perfect New World, which is a prime example of the power of MMO trailers to deceive people. And by the way, I have that video idea on my list as well in the near future. The real gameplay turned out to be not even remotely close to the trailer in terms of quality. Chrono Odyssey is an MMO that a lot of people have near the top of their lists right now. I've done a video on that project that breaks down the many red flags I've found about that project when I dug into it, and it has a lot to prove to move up my list here. The Quinfall falls in the same category for me, and I also have a video where I break down the many issues I found with that project. And Night Crows, pretty much the same story. It has even more red flags than the aforementioned MMOs. And the next category is MMOs that by all accounts appear to be solid projects, but are just not my style of MMO. Blue Protocol is a game that seems to have very solid combat and good overall gameplay experience for those that like that style of MMO. But for me, it's a heavily instance lobby-based PvE only game, and those type of games I just don't find a whole lot of enjoyment in. There have been many of these projects over the years, and the vast majority of them are shut down and no longer exist. The lack of an open world makes them feel kind of lifeless in the long run. There are only a few types of these MMOs that have done even remotely well, and the only one I can even think of is the Neverwinter MMO that released in 2013, but that game never got anywhere near mass appeal. The Wayfinder is another MMO in that exact same mold. The combat is great, and the game by all accounts seems solid, but it's another lobby-based MMO light. To me, that might struggle long term. Palia is very far removed from what I look for in an MMO, although it might be very good for those that enjoy that unique take on MMOs that it seems to be presenting. And Soulframe is one that by all accounts could be a very solid project for those that like that style. This is the same developer that made Warframe, which is a game that is very well received, but they have described the combat as slower paced and melee based. I don't necessarily mind slower paced if it's done right, but melee only combat really does not appeal to me. Next, we have Corepunk. This is a top-down MMO that seems decent on paper, but I am turned off by isometric MMOs, and it seems to be going with a very slow-paced combat style as well. So it's probably a pass for me, though for some it might be great. Then we have Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. This is a project that looks to be the spiritual successor to the EverQuest style MMOs of the past. For me, the heavy PvE focus and very slow-paced combat is not necessarily for me, but I do think it can be that MMO that a certain subset of players have been waiting a long time for, so I'm certainly rooting for it to succeed. And with those games all out of the way, let's talk about a few MMOs that have a chance to crack my top 5. Profane is an MMO that probably very few of you have heard of. This is one that absolutely will not be for most MMO players because it is an open world PvP sandbox with full action combat, and it has been in development since 2015 and is still not even in alpha state, so there is certainly no guarantee this project ever even sees the light of day. But for those that don't mind risk to reward in the open world, if it ever releases, it could be a decent MMO. Dune Awakening is another project that I think has promise, and it has a chance to crack my top 5 once we know more about it. The biggest negative is that Funcom is developing it. Funcom has developed a lot of MMOs in the past, such as Anarchy Online, Secret World, and Age of Conan. And none of these projects have done all that well, but they do have a survival game that did fairly well, Conan Exiles. And this MMO is said to be more or less a spiritual successor to that game, but obviously in a new IP and with new MMO features included. They want to have full sandbox elements, a seamless open world with thousands of players, weather such as sandstorms that affect the world and areas that can be accessed, PvP, ground and air vehicles, and a whole lot more. The project appears to have a pretty large scope, so much so that Funcom has had to bring on 2 companies as co-developers to help move the project forward. This could be a good one and has an established IP, which is a bonus, but we obviously need to see more. This next project is one that I really thought about putting in one of the previous categories, but I decided to stick it here. Luckily with this project, we do see a lot of actual gameplay footage. If you search on YouTube, there are a lot of real players posting footage so you can actually see what the game is. And by all accounts, this is a clone of WoW in nearly every way, except it does have a Bard class, and it's cross-platform with mobile. And the cross-platform with mobile part is what keeps this from making my top 5 and likely will be the downfall of the project in the long run. You can definitely see the influence of the crossplay in the gameplay, and the developers have even stated that they have had to make some concessions to accommodate mobile. The gameplay does look pretty decent though, but my biggest issue with WoW clones is why would I play them instead of just playing WoW? And it's a Chinese developed game, which historically they have done decent with monetization, but these games almost never do well in the West. The only reason I've stuck this MMO in the maybe category is because to me the gameplay actually does look pretty good, and they're not hiding anything with the actual game like a lot of developers are doing. But I'm also not sure this ever has a chance to crack my top 5 either. The next MMO is a dream, and that dream is that I do think there's a chance that new publisher Dreamhaven could one day make an MMO. Now we've seen a lot of studios that started up over the years, and the headline read, ex-Blizzard devs start a studio, and people get excited about it, and then you never hear from them again, or their project flops. But Dreamhaven, in my opinion, is different. This is a publisher that is founded by Mike Morhaime and some of the original founders of Blizzard, and the in-house studios that they own are also full of ex-Blizzard higher-ups. None of these studios under Dreamhaven are currently making an MMO, though technically Dreamhaven is partnered with Mainframe Studios, who is developing Pax Dei, so they are already dipping their toe into the MMO waters, so to speak. I could see them stepping into the MMO arena after their studios launch their first games and establish a new IP first. And if they do, their project would easily break into my top 5 most likely. And finally, another MMO that has a chance to eventually be in my top 5 is a brand new MMO on the way from new Austin, Texas-based developer Jackalope Games. We know next to nothing about it other than the studios led by Jack Emmert, who was the founder of Cryptic Studios, where he worked on City of Heroes, Star Trek Online, and Neverwinter. Later, he worked at Daybreak Games and DC Universe Online, and then the canceled Marvel Action MMO. The IP is popular, so this one certainly has a chance to be good depending on the quality. Now we are finally ready to move into my personal top 5 most anticipated upcoming MMOs. Number 5 is a tie between the new Zenimax MMO and the new AGS Lord of the Rings MMO. I have done everything known videos for both of these projects, and I rate them at these spots simply because they are established Western developers and very well funded, both of which are vital parts of making an MMO that fits the Western audiences. There are a lot of great potential projects out there that simply don't have the funding, but both of these do. And I know AGS does not have the best track record, and I addressed that in my video on it. And Zenimax has had some missteps with Elder Scrolls Online, but overall it is still a quality game, and with a few fixes it could actually be great. Combat's not very good in ESO, and the engine really struggles in large-scale PvP, which is a red flag for their new project, as Zenimax is once again using their own in-house engine for this new MMO, and AGS is doing the same. With both projects, I would prefer to see a more established engine like Unreal used, but we'll still have to wait and see on how they come out with these new engines. AGS is using their existing engine at least, so after improvements maybe it could be decent, but Zenimax by all accounts appears to be building a brand new engine, so do not expect to see this MMO anytime soon. If both of these companies have learned from their past missteps, they both have a chance to make MMOs that do well, and companies have turned it around before. It's not completely uncommon. Amazon especially has a huge chance considering they have a massive IP behind their MMO, but we do not know the IP behind Zenimax's new MMO just yet. Number 4 on my list is an MMO project that might not even be real, but there are fairly significant and I think likely rumors out there that ArenaNet is making a new MMO. And if this is true, this easily makes my top 5, as ArenaNet is one of my favorite developers of all time. I liked both Guild Wars 1 and 2. It appears that they are using Unreal Engine for this project, which should be a huge improvement over the Guild Wars 2 engine, which has had major struggles with large-scale encounters. Guild Wars 2 has some of the best combat I have personally seen in an MMO, and overall it is one of my best current MMOs on the market, in my opinion. There are a few things I certainly had issues with, but some of that is just personal preference. So if this is a real MMO project, it easily sits at number 4 for me, and could move up if we get confirmation that it is actually an MMO, and once we learn more about it. Number 3 on my list is one that I've done a lot of videos on, and it is one that some of you might be surprised to see at number 3 and not number 1, and that is the Riot MMO. But keep in mind, this list is the projects that I personally am the most interested in, not the projects that the majority of people would be most interested in. I'm going to do a separate video on what I view to be the upcoming MMOs with the best chance to take over the genre, or in essence the ones that might have mass appeal potential. And on that list, spoiler alert, the Riot MMO sits at number 1, and it's really not even close. So how can I put this MMO at number 3 on this list and number 1 on the next list when we know very little about it? It's because Riot has a great track record historically, and they're currently sitting in a very similar position as Blizzard sat in 2004 when World of Warcraft launched. Blizzard had an established IP, and at the time every single game they released was a huge success. They took what worked in that genre and improved it to have that mass appeal potential. This is the exact formula that Riot currently uses for their games. When they make a new game in a new genre, they take what has worked and make a highly polished and very easy to get into version of that game. Now, I'm not sure that will actually work with an MMO, and the CEO recently stated that people don't want to play another WoW reskin, so at least on paper it appears they might be going a different route with this project and not just making a WoW clone. If that indeed ends up being the case, this could move higher on my personal list. And I'm going to also be redoubling my efforts on all of these top 3 MMOs on my list. I recently launched a Riot MMO specific Discord and have another project I'm working on for the Riot MMO soon. Be sure to check out my Everything Known video for the Riot MMO if you haven't. My Everything Known document is converted to my website, but I have something new that I'm working on as well for that. The number 2 MMO is one that I would not rate very high on the mass appeal list, and that is Pax Dei. Pax Dei is an open world sandbox, and that alone means it is less likely to have mass appeal. Sandbox MMOs have really struggled in the past to get much traction, but there are a few reasons I think this one could be very different. One, it's not full PvP throughout the entire world. There are plenty of safe zones, and while we don't know about looting, it seems like full loot might be restricted or even not available. And both of these things improve the chances this MMO could actually achieve some version of mass appeal, though I still think it's going to be an uphill battle. Some other things that I think are positive for this project are they are a Western developer and they are very well funded. The devs mostly come from EVE Online, which is one of the more popular sandboxes of all time. They have a lot of development experience, and they seem to be going the correct route of only showing the game when it is ready to be shown, but not being so closed that they never solicit any feedback from the players. I also have a new project for Pax Dei that I'm working on, but I am not ready to show that yet, but I will show you as soon as I can. Expect a lot more Pax Dei coverage from me in the near future. And if you haven't seen my latest Everything Known video for Pax Dei, be sure to do that as well. The number one MMO on my personal most anticipated upcoming MMOs is probably no surprise to those that have followed this channel for a long time, or to those that noticed I made a 1.5 hour long video covering everything known about this MMO, and that is of course Ashes of Creation. This MMO checks a lot of the boxes of what I like in MMOs, although I do like a variety of MMOs and have no issues with theme park or sandbox style MMOs, and do like both styles. I've gotten plenty of enjoyment out of WoW and many of the WoW clones over the years, and have no problem with that style. But with Ashes, we're finally getting something different, and for me, that is refreshing. And when I look at Ashes, I see an MMO that has real potential to be the best open-world PvP MMO we have ever seen. So that's the main reason for me that it is number one. But do not despair if you're not into open-world PvP, because there are a lot of systems in this MMO for most playstyles, in my opinion. Be sure to watch my Everything Known About Ashes of Creation video if you want to see all the features in the design of this game, which are plentiful to say the least. And we know a tremendous amount about this project, and it's super ambitious. Now, some have criticized some of the gameplay we have seen. Many don't like the combat, but I personally actually do like it. From what I have seen, it looks like an improved version of Guild Wars 2 combat, which, as I said, is one of the best combat systems in an MMO, in my opinion. Some have said the graphics don't look good, which I don't understand at all, considering they're showing the game in a very early state, and to me, the Alpha 2 footage they have shown looks tremendous. The Alpha 1 stuff didn't look nearly as polished, but again, that is Alpha 1. That being said, by far my biggest concern is that the project might be way too ambitious. I don't see much in the way of scope creep, but what I do see is a massive scope that might be very difficult to fulfill. Either way, if you haven't signed up for an Ashes of Creation account, be sure to use my referral code linked in the video description to sign up. And that's all I have for this one, and I do apologize about how long this video ended up being, but I did want to explain each MMO and why I put it where I put it. And I'll have another list of the actual top 5 MMOs that might have mass appeal in the future. With that, guys, appreciate you watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you guys in the next video.